Mr. Lawson is currently a senior advisor at EY with over 35 years of experience in banking. He has been closely involved in the evolution of Russian banking while CEO of HSBC Russia, and before that, president of Citibank Russia. Speaking of environments, you've been in a lot of environments. Throughout your career, you've been to lots of different countries. Kenya, you started in England, and the list goes on, but you've ended up here in Russia. What can you say about moving around so much? What has that been like, and what brought you to Russia?
Mm-hmm. Well, there were 11 countries: England, Scotland, Kenya, Greece, Egypt, France, Norway, Italy, Russia, Puerto Rico, and America.
Oh, that's a mouthful.
I know, and I have to do it in that order because otherwise I get confused. One of the good things, though, is that if I met you in Greece, it was 1984, and it sounds like I have a perfect memory for you. I don't. I just know the year that I was in Greece.
Okay.
So it's actually quite a good way of clocking people during that period. Which country were you, and then I can tell you which year it was.
Have you thought about creating an acronym for it?
No. It's just because it's the same 11 countries, so I've been practicing it for a while.
Okay, great.
First of all, what happened there was that I was sent to these different countries.
Mm-hmm.
I think as we were speaking earlier, I didn't take banking seriously. In August the 2nd, 1982, which seems like a long time ago because it was, I woke up in Kenya. I was 27 years old. I was the corporate bank head, and suddenly there was a coup. And in that coup, I had to get on with dealing with the issues around managing a business during very intense periods. And it was at that point that Citibank said, time for you to be our crisis manager. And then that started the process of me moving from country to country because we got into a pattern where I was taken into different countries when those situations got to a certain point. In terms of my social life, in terms of, well, there's two parts to this. One, how did it feel constantly changing these countries? Mm-hmm. The fact is that every morning I woke up, I was a Citibanker. I didn't have to think what was my role in the world. I didn't have to think about the specifics of my work environment because as I plugged into different environments around the world, it was always a Citibank environment. It was a vocabulary, as it were. I mean, the language might have been different, but the vocabulary was a vocabulary of banking, and I had a specific role to play. So the work aspect of it was looked after. The personal aspect of it, I became very good at what I called small net fishing. So let me explain what that is. Small net fishing is that you gather as many people into your net as quickly as possible. Big party, go to the local bar, invite everybody over, do whatever you have to get a big group of fish, and then immediately start throwing out the fish that you're not interested in and keeping the ones you are. And if you get good at this process, which after these many times I did, you end up with one or two big fish, and I don't mean important people, I mean interesting people, one or two big fish from each country. And when you keep hold of those people, you end up with this wonderful collection of diverse people. Another piece of advice, if you're in somebody else's country, A, don't talk about their politics, B, get to know those people locally. Mm-hmm. There's no point. I meet some people who hang out with expatriates. Well, if you want to meet Americans, there's plenty of Americans back where you live.
Of course.
If you want to meet Russians and you're in Russia, this is the place to meet them. Indulge in their culture, indulge in their interests, and really find yourself sinking into the environment because that is where you'll get real value. And I've been in this very fortunate position that I had these many different countries. I have an 18-year-old son, and I've promised to take him to all 11. We've managed 9 so far. We've got 2 to go. And in each of these countries, I still am in touch with people that I knew back when I was traveling through them because they're locals. They didn't move. Mm-hmm. And this has created a great tapestry for him to get to know the world through.
Very great, very great. And so, now transitioning, you have kind of moved in the later part of your life into teaching and lecturing.
Well, I mean, I think the first question is why did I get into it?
Okay.
And I mean, then how did I get into it? It's less interesting, but the why did I get into it? And I think this is something where I now have far greater appreciation for the challenges of the teaching profession. When you look at it from a distance, and even when you do guest lectures, you walk in, you do your song and dance and you leave, there's nothing left behind where the students take what they can, but you're not in any sort of relationship with the students. It's very different when you're in the process of actually teaching and trying to make sure that what you're teaching is actually something that they understand, appreciate, and can use. And when I got involved with teaching was 6 years, well actually I've been interested in teaching for a long time, but 6 years ago when I left HSBC, I had an opportunity to look at my life and say, well, what is it that I want for the next stage of these shadowlands of my life? and for this period, what I realized was, look, I had 35 years of experience in 11 countries. I had this deep well of experience in different countries, different industries, different economic cycles, different cultures. And now is a great time for me to pass this on to another generation. What I hadn't realized was the value that I would get out of it by actually reliving some of my leadership moments. And the 6 years that I've had of time to digest and then ruminate and then actually teach some of my own cases. You know, this is what I did in this situation. And then, of course, I'm faced with, would I have done it differently? Should I have done it differently? It's been a very valuable experience for me as well, in that it's given me the chance to reflect. I sometimes wonder whether it wouldn't be nice to have another chief executive role just to see whether or not I could implement some of the things that I've learned about my own management style.
One thing I can say is listen to some of your lectures, especially on this idea of successful failure. You know, there's different lessons that you can hear it once and it carries on for the rest of your life. But there's some lessons that you need to hear over and over again. And I feel like listening to your lectures and your presentations, you're very much talking about lessons that we need to hear over and over again in our life because they're very applicable. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually think if you stand up in front of a group of young people, undergraduates, and you talk about failure, you know, it goes straight over their head. Basically, they look at you and they think, well, listen, old man, you know, you may have had to deal with your failures, but it's never going to happen to us. If you talk to people who are 10 years in or maybe 15 years into their careers, they probably have run across some situations that they can identify as failures. So in a way, yes, I do think that. It's quite interesting. I teach in different environments. I've taught to the theatre groups. I've also taught in music schools. And what was interesting to me, I was teaching at a music school for 12 to 18-year-olds. Musicians are very, very comfortable with the concept of successful failure because every time they give a performance, they are subject to criticism, which they understand is constructive criticism. And so for them, this idea of replaying a piece, understanding what the issue was from the previous time, correcting it, and then performing better, alongside the old saying of 10,000 hours to be an expert, that those parts of that they understand that failure is a part of the process and it comes naturally for musicians. Sometimes it doesn't come quite so naturally for business people.
All right, so I know that you're not all about business, not all about crisis management. There's an extra life out there for you. What can you tell us about your outside interests?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I could do the standard dating thing. You know, I'm interested in opera and ballet and reading, and you know, I love animals. But actually, I am interested in opera and ballet and reading. I have, since the age of 10, one of my principal hobbies has been photography, and for me, photography, it's obviously there's very different styles of photography. I have recently been able to focus on a project, and that project is dancers.
Okay.
And you may not know, but Perm is home to one of the best ballet companies in the country. The Mariinsky was moved to Perm during the Second World War, and the ballerinas and ballet dancers stayed in the city, some of them, and they've got this extraordinarily strong ballet tradition. And I do a trade. I fly to Perm. I teach at the university on a Friday, and on a Saturday I go to the theatre and I can spend from 10 in the morning till 11 at night at the practice halls and then backstage at the ballet or the opera. And for me, this is a wonderful opportunity to park all of my business interests, all of my teaching, and just get in there and look for visual images, which I find very challenging.
I've heard a whole lot about you and musketeers. Could you tell us about this musketeers? Yeah,
it's a question that comes up a bit because when I say I'm a musketeer, there's normally a moment where people look at me and think, really? First of all, I'm not a horseman. Secondly, I don't know how to use a sword. But I do have an essential quality as a musketeer, which is that I enjoy Armagnac. And one of the essential criteria for being a musketeer these days is that you need to enjoy the chateau in Armagnac, because that's where the musketeers come from. We're based in a small town in the west of France. We meet once a year. There's 3,000 members of the musketeers. Recently, 3 years ago, we set up a musketeer chapter in Moscow, and we have the Russian musketeers. We have a group now of 24 musketeers in Moscow. I have to say it's a very interesting group of people. It covers business, politics, and the arts. It's very diverse. And the one thing that I would say is, if you're going to be a musketeer, you have to be proposed, and you have to have a musketeer story. It means, you have to be living in the world, have interests outside of your core profession, and that's what I'm proud of. Plus we have great medals. We have the Maltese Cross is our medal, so that looks good.
And so what's your musketeer story? How did you become part of the group?
A friend of mine owned one of the chateaus in Armagnac, and nearly 10 years ago he asked me to join. I have to say I never imagined that I was going to be participating in Russia as a musketeer, but here we are.
Sounds good. Mr. Lawson, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was definitely a pleasure. Well, it's been a pleasure to be here, and I really, as I say, just want to repeat it. I love the time that I spend at GSOM, and I look forward to spending much more time here.